Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bull Central. I'm joined with me today by a very special guest, a new guest actually on the channel. He's been kind enough to take time out of his day despite his busy job, especially this time of year, leading studio content team over at NBC Sports Chicago, also contributor to the Bulls Talk podcast. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show Kevin Anderson of NBC Sports Chicago. Kevin, how we doing, man? Appreciate you making the time.
Thanks, Jamal. I'm really good. We had media day yesterday for the Bulls, which we'll really dive into. The Ahsoka finale tonight is coming, so I'm pumped for both, and yeah, I'm doing really well.
Excellent. Now, if you're not already, be sure to follow Kevin at Kevin_NBCS on Twitter, as well as be sure to subscribe to the Bulls Talk podcast, listening in on all the great work that Kevin, Tony, KC, Jason, they're putting out over there. So, Kevin, Media Day
Yeah.
yesterday. For those watching, we're recording this the morning after Media Day. We got to hear from AK, Billy Donovan, some of the players. For the most part, I would say it was kind of expected or predictable responses that one would
hmm
probably hear in Media Day, or at least if you've been following the Bulls, it was sort of the same themes and sentiment from the front office and what they've expressed in recent months. But even despite some of the predictability, there was a lot to unpack given the comments that were made. You were there in person. So I'm sure folks tuning in, they're going to want to know more. One, what were some of your things that stood out to you the most? But also, was there anything, maybe some stuff that we didn't necessarily see on camera? What was the general vibe between the guys and how were things looking that maybe we're not really privy to based on what we saw the Bulls post on their YouTube channel?
Things were fairly loose. I mean, I've covered with NBC Sports Chicago, and then prior to that, when we were Comcast Sportsnet at the time, I've been here in Chicago for 19 years, so I've covered media day and the better part of most of those here. Things were really loose with the team. Like the players were in really good moods. It was drama free. It's not like the situation in Philadelphia where things are really tense, or even in Toronto to a certain extent. Like players were having fun with each other. They were being goofy, like off camera. Like we know Dalen Terry is a personality. Like he was coming behind guys doing interviews and taking pictures.
Right.
And even at one point during Coby White's media session, Patrick Williams took the mic and was
Mm-hmm.
asking Coby questions about his season and upcoming and his game and his hair and all those things, right? They were in a very good mood. Like there was no tension, there was no drama. Even with the Lonzo Ball situation, we could certainly get into, which is obviously a little bit of a downer, if you will. Certainly he's going to be out all of year. Even then, there was optimism coming from Lonzo that he's going to
Right.
play basketball again. So, to be quite honest, in me attending media days for many years now, things were pretty loose and pretty drama free and not much tension. Like things were good behind the scenes. It was efficient from what the Bulls run this, and just for kind of a peek behind the curtain, if you will, for fans and maybe haven't attended media day or know how it works. It's a big deal. It's the unofficial start of the NBA season, and
Right.
essentially what it's not just about the interviews. Like certainly players come to the podium, but there are many other things happening behind the scenes. Essentially what media day is, it's a chance for the league, the team, and the team's partners, being the radio partners, the TV partners, the websites, to come in, and everything from getting photos of players in their new uniforms. I mean, certainly that's a big deal in Milwaukee, seeing Dame wearing a Bucks uniform for the first time. So it's a chance to get players headshots for the start of the season. There are players doing stuff for NBA Entertainment, NBA TV, certainly us. Essentially, each player goes to about a dozen different stations they have to attend to throughout the course
Mm.
of the morning and afternoon. Like obviously, what most of the fans see is the podium situation, in which they have
Right.
a select number of players and front office and coaches go to the podium, but they also have to do stuff with their radio partners, 670 The Score, and they come to us as the TV partner with NBC Sports Chicago, and they do headshots and they do goofy stuff for the Bulls TV folks. And yeah, it's a lot. Like it's a 3 hour session that players are put through. Many players don't look forward to it, but everybody we talked to, like they had a good time. And like certainly you talk about players have some fun with it. Not only what I shared about like Dalen Terry and P. Will, but you see what Jimmy Butler does on media day, right? Jimmy knows that his headshot that is going to appear in
Right.
every graphic for the entire season is going to be the photo he takes on media day.
Right.
And we got what we got yesterday from Jimmy Butler in Miami for that, and the year before we got
The year before, yeah.
some wild stuff. So it's from a media point of view, from my end, it's fun. It's fun to cover. Like it's certainly, there's a lot of optimism for most teams around the league on opening day, media day, and certainly specific to the Bulls, there was a lot of optimism too coming out of what they were saying.
You know, you were talking about Lonzo Ball. One of the things that stood out to me, or at least was a surprising way, was Lonzo being at media day in uniform. Being one of the speakers for the press conference. If I remember correctly, he wasn't there last year for media day, but he spoke to the press, I think, the following day on the first day of training camp, but it was via Zoom. Do you think this was more of a sign that the Bulls, hey, we still believe in this guy, we're still committed to him, and he will be returning to this team next season? I don't know. What was your sort of perspective in terms of wanting to have Lonzo there, wanting him to be in uniform and actually talking to the media?
Yeah. So number one is Lonzo's free and mobile in terms of like he's got no restrictions to walking, right? Like
Right.
he's not in a boot, he's not on crutches. So I think last year that may have been a little bit part of in terms of like just mobility. But this year for Lonzo, like it was interesting because, certainly we didn't get to see Lonzo run drills, right? He wasn't running, he wasn't jumping, he wasn't doing cuts, but he was walking around fine, which is certainly a good sign from where he was having the surgery in the spring. And then in terms of the team's approach to it, he is still on this team. Now, designated player exception aside, and them freeing up some money this year with him being ruled out for the entire year, he is still a part of this team, and they certainly expect he will play basketball in the 2024-25 season. I mean, he went on record yesterday, not only at the podium, but he came over to our set. We did a full 2-hour streaming show with Jason Goff, Kendall Gill, and Will Perdue. He joined the guys on set. It was optimistic about his future. He intends to play basketball again. And there is, in my sense of hearing him speak about that, there is no wavering in his confidence of that. He fully intends to be the small minority that's able to play given the surgery he's taken. And so I would not certainly be surprised at all if coming next training camp a year from now, he is a full participant and he is good to go for the start of next season. Now, there's still a lot of hurdles that need to be overcome. He needs to check a lot of benchmarks between today and the start of next year to accomplish that. But there is a lot of optimism from his end that he's going to play basketball again. And certainly the major question mark is going to be at what level, right? Yeah. The Lonzo that the Bulls signed, the Lonzo they saw for the first 2.5 months of his tenure with Chicago may not be the Lonzo that we see again. But at the same time, he fully intends to play. And that was, you're right. That's one of the things to come out of media day yesterday that I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of Bulls fans, like you were talking about Lonzo, whether or not he'll be the same player when all is said and done, if and when he comes back, we all have a little bit of PTSD with Derrick Rose, right? It's like, it obviously came back and was still a good player. It just, he wasn't the same MVP caliber player. And I think that's the biggest question mark on Bulls fans' minds.
But Jamal, what's interesting about that is Derrick, over the course of the last 13 years, has had to change his game, right?
Yeah.
Like he in 2015, when they were playing the Cavs in the playoffs, wasn't the same Derrick Rose that we saw in 2008 and 2009. Right. Obviously, the explosiveness isn't there. But I will say this about Lonzo's game specifically. It is not one that is hyper reliant on athleticism.
Yeah, true.
And so if he's a guy that has to adjust certain aspects of his play, I think he's actually better suited to do it than Derrick was, having to essentially completely rebuild from scratch the way he was approaching the game of basketball.
Right. And I kind of remind Bulls fans of that sometimes to kind of give some hope, if you will, is that regardless of any injuries that you sustain as a player, your IQ of the game is never going to change. And Lonzo is a very high IQ player. That
Yes.
will stay with him. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to go away. I mean, maybe, in certain aspects, I mean, 2.5 years, he takes off, the game, the league has changed to an extent, but overall, he's still going to be a smart basketball player. And as long as he's still able to be a smart basketball player, he's still able to shoot, which the Bulls need, and he's able to be a good defender. I mean, that's what they need right now. That's what's going to be, most important. But switching topics just a little bit, because I actually wanted to get your thoughts on this. Yeah, I believe it was Sam Smith who asked this question, Vucevic, regarding whether he thought the Bulls could play a similar style of offense like the Nuggets do, which we know AK used to run things over there and built a fair amount of that roster. Not saying the Bulls are going to be able to unlock their offense and execute just the way that the Nuggets have been able to do, but it was an interesting point. Do you think the Bulls, with the guys that they have on their roster, could adopt a similar play style to that of the Nuggets?
So the Vucevic storyline was my most surprising thing to come out of media day yesterday.
Okay.
Right? Because certainly you go into it expecting that Donovan and Karnisovas are going to say, hey, we need to play at an increased pace, right? That was obvious. We need to have better ball movement. That is obvious. We need to take more threes, which Donovan was actually very, very quick to point out. It's not just about more 3-point attempts. It's the quality of 3-pointers they need. They need better quality. They need more threes, but they need better quality threes. But the Vucevic situation, I was a little surprised at, because not just Sam asking Vuce this, but Billy Donovan went out of his way to talk about it, is that they seemingly are going to make a bigger role out of Vucevic as a playmaker in the offense. And to what you just alluded to, this isn't a situation in which I think it's going to be entirely remodeled around Denver's approach with Jokic, right? However, I think they are going to borrow aspects of their playbook, if you will, game plan with that. And I think a little bit similar to what Denver, maybe a lesser extent of what Miami does with Bam. I think we're going to see Vucevic utilized as a playmaker much more in this offense this year than we have in the past several years with him in there. And the reason I think we're going to get that a little bit more is one of the other big things that Donovan talked about that they need to be better at this season is free throw attempts and being aggressive in the paint. And that was certainly something. I think last year they were maybe 24th in the league, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly, in free throw attempts per game. They need to improve that, right? Because when you've got Vucevic, DeRozan, and Lavine, 3 guys who were relatively healthy last year, 3 guys who are very good offensively, they need to be better as an offensive team. Like there's no reason they shouldn't be a top 10 offensive team in the league. And I think one of the ways they're going to try and change that is use Vucevic as a playmaker. He is very underrated as a passer. He has very good court vision. And I would not be surprised if we see many more design plays in which Vucevic is essentially acting as point center. This honestly would not be that dissimilar to the role we saw Joakim Noah in many years ago when he was, I think he finished first team All NBA that year. Was that 2013-14?
He was defensive player of the year that year too.
Yes. Yeah. It was, I think he was top 5 in MVP voting too, if I remember correctly. And so like Joakim Noah was a point center in that role. And it was a little bit ahead of his time in terms of the NBA and where they were in doing that. I honestly think we're going to get more of that with Vooch as the focal role in this offense, because there's a lot of discussion. We certainly get into it as a different topic about who's going to start a point guard. But whoever starts a point guard not necessarily is going to be leading this team in assists, right? Like I think Vucevic assist numbers are going to take a big step up. Like it wouldn't surprise me if he averages north of 5 assists a game this year, just given of what I heard out of media day yesterday from not just Vooch, but Karnisovas and honestly Billy Donovan. When the head coach talks about something that he wants to get better at in a way to get better at, I don't think it's misdirection. Like this is not a Bill Belichick, hey, we're going to tell the league we're going to run the offense through Vooch, or at least to give Vooch more touches, and it's not going to happen, right? To throw other teams off their game plan. But yeah, the Vucevic thing was the most surprising thing to come out of media day for me.
So let's talk about training camp a little bit because the guys are in practice right now, I
In
assume.
Nashville.
Yes, in Nashville.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're getting updates from KC, and he's probably, texting you, "Hey, this is what DeMar had for breakfast," right? But preseason also around the corner. Bulls play their preseason opener in Milwaukee on Sunday. That'll be fun since we get, our first chance to see Dame in a Bucks uniform. But let's talk about some of the big storylines going into training camp and into the preseason. I think what's on a lot of people's minds, or at least what was asked a lot about at media day, is what's the latest regarding DeMar's contract extension? Are talks happening? What's the latest? To be honest, I feel like what's been forgotten about more, a forgotten topic that actually has a much quicker deadline. If I remember, it's the potential contract extension for Patrick Williams on his
Yeah.
rookie deal. That topic got a little traction at the start of the offseason, but ever since, no one's really been talking about it. Even myself, I had kind of forgotten about it until we saw Devin Vassell get his 5-year extension yesterday. And it
Mm-hmm.
reminded me, like, oh yeah, Pat still hasn't been extended yet. What's the latest that you guys have been hearing over NBC Sports Chicago? Any extension talks regarding, him, the Bulls and Pat's camp? Do you think they will actually reach an agreement on an extension prior to the start of the season?
So Karnisovas was asked specifically about DeRozan and had his stock answer of,
Right.
we don't comment about ongoing negotiations for
Yeah.
contracts, right? And he holds things very close to the vest in that regard.
Yeah.
I was going through the sound yesterday. I don't believe anybody asked about Patrick Williams extension at all, which means it just was not in the forefront of all the topics that the media wanted to ask. The P. Will possible extension was very, very low on the list, and I guess by the time anybody went to ask it, the media session was done. It may have been asked on the side by somebody else, but I did not see any quotes. I did not hear anything from AK about P. Will. So I have nothing specific to share in that regard about anything official on the record that I saw. However, personally, I would be surprised if an extension got done.
Okay.
Typically, in this environment of this window before player season, teams like to lowball that offer to the player, right? Because they feel like if the player is going to take that extension a year early, essentially, that they're going to do it on a team-friendly rate, a team-friendly deal. I don't think P will possibly. He certainly, every player's motivation is different. Some players like that guaranteed security, and they're willing to take a little bit less money per year, and some less money overall to have that guaranteed 3 years, 4 years after the following season. And so I would be surprised, though, if P. Will did that. We expect a lot out of Patrick Williams this year. Right. Certainly what we've seen out of him so far in his career, to me, speaks to potential. There is significant potential in Patrick Williams as a player. And I think he sees the same thing. So I honestly don't think an extension will get done between now and I think is the deadline October 15th. It has changed a lot.
I'd have to look at. I thought it was like it has to be done before opening night.
Yeah,
might be like the 23rd or something like that. I'm actually in the opposite camp. I'd be surprised if they don't extend him. I don't know. I feel like I mean, it's for a couple reasons. One, I think the front office, this was their first draft pick since taking over the team. They've been really all about Pat and obviously, everyone's hoping for a breakout season from Patrick Williams. I could see them giving an extension to try to lock him in now without, him having a potential breakout year, and then they end up having to pay him more. I mean, I can see it from a few angles, right? Because it's like, well, you could hold out. You wait for him to become a restricted free agent, see how he does this season. Maybe you can get him for less if he doesn't really show up that well, which would be unfortunate for Bulls fans. But I don't know. I could see it happening where they try to lock him in now, especially because he's young. He does still have a lot of potential great two-way player. I would be surprised if they did. But at the same time, who really knows, right? Because like you said, AK always likes to keep things, close to the chest. You're never really going to find out until it actually happens. The one I would be surprised by, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that as well. And we talked about this a little bit actually when I was on the Bulls Talk podcast with you guys. DeMar getting extended before the season, I would be absolutely shocked if that happened. And a lot of it is just because You have to see how the season transpires. I mean, it's a little bit different, right? Because Patrick, there's a deadline for when they can extend him. If I'm not, if I'm not mistaken, DeMar can be extended at any time throughout the season. That includes even going up leading into free agency. So they can even do what they did to similar to Vucevic. You have to see how the season is going to transpire, how this team looks. Is it working before you extend DeMar? That's my perspective. I don't know if you feel differently.
So just to go back to P. Will for a second, I do believe they're going to give him an offer for an extension. What
Okay.
I think though is that it will be at a level in which P. Will thinks it's too low.
Okay.
Like I don't think we're going to get
like a Jimmy Butler situation.
Yes, or like a Jaylen Brown type extension, like something like that, in which it's a max or near max extension. That would surprise me. Now, at the same time, maybe they meet in the middle and they decide for both parties, team and P. Will, you know what? This makes sense. Let's sign this. So, but I still would be a little surprised if P. Will gets an extension right now. They're going to make an offer. They want him on the team for the reasons you just listed, certainly being that first draft pick out of this front office. It would surprise me a little bit, but the DeRozan extension would shock me if he got a deal done now. For the reasons you just listed, but also because this front office, I don't think is fully set on this is going to be our team for the next 4 years. Right. And DeRozan is a big part of that. DeRozan has gone on the record saying he wants to get a new deal done. He wants to retire Chicago Bull. He loves it in Chicago. He is great in the locker room. The players respect him. The media respects him. From everything I understand, the coaching staff and the front office really like him. The problem with DeRozan is twofold. Number one is his age. He's obviously getting into his mid-30s now. And if you're talking about a 3 to 4 year extension, I think he would be 37 on the 38 on the back end of that deal, if my math is right. And so you're talking about, not everybody is LeBron James. Not everybody is going to play at a elite level in their mid to upper 30s. Right. So that's one thing that is a concern. DeRozan's game does lean itself towards being productive more so than somebody else who's hitting their mid 30s and late 30s. But the other thing is the team itself, and this is a little bit out of DeRozan's control, is if given this core in this roster, and we certainly know they added some 3-point shooting. I think Javon Carter and Torrey Craig are going to make this team better. I think they're going to be better than last year. How many more wins are they going to generate? That's up for debate. I think honestly 45 is probably realistic for this team, which would put them in the 6th seed, which would be out of the play-in, which is where you want to be. But specific to DeRozan, they've got to decide are they okay just being with a playoff contender versus one of the top 3 teams in the East? And are they going to be able to get there with DeRozan? And if it's not with DeRozan, are you a better team in the next 4 years with DeRozan not on the roster and having another piece in place of that, both in terms of minutes, in terms of potential salary cap? These are all complex questions that the front office has to answer. And I think where we are right now, they're not going to definitively have those answered before opening night. And I don't think necessarily they're going to even have those answered by the trade deadline. Yeah. Agreed. Karnisovas was asked specifically about the trade deadline in February and how that's going to impact what they do on this roster. Now, he gave a very evasive answer, but I'll paraphrase what I think he really meant by that. They feel that they're going to be contending for a playoff spot come February. Mm-hmm. If they aren't, and because of the play-in situation in the league right now, for you not to be contending for a play-in spot or a playoff spot, things need to go horribly wrong. Yeah. Like, you would have to have an awful start. You would probably, for this roster, have to have multiple significant injuries that were to key players for you to be 10 games under 500 come February, right? Like, to be at the bottom of the conference. And I don't think that's going to happen either. And so my prediction is that they will be faced with a scenario at the trade deadline about trading DeRozan, keeping DeRozan, what the offers might be. I don't think the offers would be significant for a guy on a 3-month rental at that point. And I think this will go into next off season before they definitively finish up the 23-24 season, see where they finish, and then decide what is best for this organization moving forward. And do they want to keep DeRozan on the same time like they have Vooch, which I think is probably a smarter play, and then go move forward and see what this team is. But specific to DeRozan and extension, I do not see an extension getting done now or before the start of the season. It would truly surprise me. It's possible because everybody's a whole lot of respect for DeRozan, so it is possible, but I don't think it's probable.
And I think, I mean, they, not to say they won't extend DeRozan at any time. It's very possible that they could, right? At some point down the line at the end of the season. But for me, it's more about, they're going to want that flexibility, right? There could be a lot of changes coming this upcoming summer. And if they were to extend DeRozan now, that's going to limit their ability to make swift changes if need be, right? The other topic I wanted to hit on, another big storyline going into camp, just based on the sheer number of questions from media day, really throughout the offseason, the starting point guard spot. It sounds like it's going to be a competition for that role. It's up for grabs. I've got my thought on who I think it's going to be, but wanted to get your take. Who do you think will be the Bulls' starting point guard on opening night?
I think it'll be Jevon Carter. There is certainly, they left it open yesterday. They wouldn't commit. Essentially, it's probably a 2-player race for this, right? It's Coby or Jevon. And they are very high in Coby's development. And we saw significant development from Coby last year, specific to his ball handling ability, his decision-making, and his playmaking. And so the player Coby was his rookie year, getting hot, scoring 35, we started his last game before COVID shut everything down in 2020. I think he had like 33 or 35 points in that game. It was his first game of his career he had started. He had gotten hot a couple weeks leading up to that. Pure scorer. His game has evolved significantly since that version of Coby. He's much better as a playmaker. However, what I think is best for this roster and what is best for the first and second units would be starting Jevon Carter because of his defense ability. Carter is a very, very good defender and also a very good three-point shooter. And I think what that starting unit is going to be missing is that hard-nosed defender. We've got, obviously, Vucevic, Lavine, and DeRozan are locked in as starters. There is some debate because they didn't really commit to who would be starting at power forward. If it ends up being Caruso, I think there is flexibility there. Then maybe Coby is the better choice to start. However, if it's Patrick Williams, or even if it's a dark horse like Torrey Craig, then maybe Coby's better suited off the bench. And you want that backcourt perimeter defense that Carter's going to bring to this team. We know that Lavine is not a great defender. DeRozan's not a great defender. Vucevic is not a great defender. You then need solid defense somewhere out there. Interior would be good. Perimeter is also really good. I think Carter makes the most sense. Certainly, he is going to see a significant uptick in his minutes if he starts from what he has done prior in his career, certainly with Milwaukee last year. However, his skill and his playmaking ability and his defense, I think, makes him the best choice with that starting five. And Coby's skill as a scorer makes him the best choice for the reserves in the second unit. I think probably the first, assuming Patrick Williams starts at power forward, your first two guys off the bench in some form, depending on the game situation, are probably going to be Coby and Caruso. And that, to me, that second unit with Coby, Caruso, Craig, Drummond, that's a really good second unit. And I think what that second unit lacks is scoring. Because as much as I love Alex Caruso, he's not a scorer. Not a scorer. Drummond, not a scorer, right? Craig has three-point ability and has got the game a little bit similar to Carter in terms of his defense, but also not somebody you're going to rely on to get you 10 points in a 4-minute stretch or in a 3-minute stretch. Coby can do that.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I think when it comes down to starting point guard, it isn't necessarily going to be who wins the battle individually between Carter and Coby. I think it really comes down to who is the best piece to fit in the puzzle for the starting five and the backups.
So I've got Carter as well for all the reasons you just described, but also Billy Donovan loves his veterans.
Yes,
You know
he
what I mean? Like,
does.
I mean, that's kind of, I know that they're saying, oh, it's a competition. It's going to be up for grabs between Carter, Io, and Coby. But, Billy's always gone with his veterans generally, not all the time, right? But when there's a good veteran that's available to him, I just think that's going to make the most sense. That doesn't mean that I think, Carter's going to get, all of the minutes in that role, and you're not really going to see much from Coby or Io, but I do think that he's going to go at least to start the game with Carter. But I mean, we'll see. We'll see how it ends up playing out. Um, Preseason, right around the
Yeah.
corner.
Yeah.
For the most part, preseason, how a team shows up during that time, really should not be an indication of what to expect from said team, because preseason is really used more for experimentation purposes, play around with rotations, see what works best. That said, though, I do think there is something to be said about how a team's chemistry looks, their offensive system, and how they look as a unit. And does that trickle into the regular season? What are you looking to see most from the Bulls as we enter the preseason?
So I'm very curious to see number one rotations by Donovan. And certainly they are going to vary from game to game. Who we see play against Milwaukee is not going to be the same rotation we see in games 2, 3, 4, and
Right.
5 in the preseason. So there is going to be some experimentation there, not only because of giving guys extra rest, and the guys don't play 36 minutes in preseason games. So that's certainly an aspect of it too. But I'm very curious the rotations we're going to see. But also the offense. Like there is a huge question mark on how is Donovan going to make this team work. And they talked at media day about better ball movement, right? Increased pace was a huge emphasis that they talked about. And
Yeah.
so I want to see what that looks like on not only on paper, but on the floor.
Yeah.
Like one of the big things they emphasize with increased pace is somebody gets the ball, run out, right? There were too many times last year, somebody got a rebound and they looked, where is Lavine? Where is DeRozan? I need to give them the ball. And then they walked it up. There was too much of that last year. There was one moment I think they actually got a backcourt violation.
Oh yeah. That happened. I feel like that happened a few times. Yeah.
Because they were like literally just walking
Yeah.
the ball up, and there
And
was
they were
no
in like
sense of
big
urgency.
game moments, right? Like towards
Yes.
the game. Yeah.
Yeah. There was gosh, I forget what game it was. There was one with DeRozan and I think
One was with
Coby.
DeRozan. Yeah.
And they had like a backcourt violation. It was like, how do you let that happen?
Yeah.
I would be floored if that happened at all this year, because there is going to be a sense of urgency for pace. And I think Craig and Carter specifically are going to help in that aspect of it, because they've got very good vision and they do play at a higher pace. And so I'm really curious about the offense that we're going to see with this team. And getting back to our early conversation about Vucevic, if you're going to start implementing Vucevic as a playmaker, it's got to happen in these preseason games.
Yeah, you got to try it out in the preseason.
You're not going to just like
can be made.
Yep, exactly right. Like you've got to run sets, you got to run plays. You've got, if you're going to truly have Vucevic with the ball in his hands a significant more amount this year, it's got to happen in the preseason. So like I'm going to be very interested in seeing if that's going to happen specifically against Milwaukee in that first preseason game. And I think it will. So like the preseason is a lot of times like I look at these little nuanced aspects of the offense and the rotations about how they're going to really be executed.
Yeah. Kevin, I'll get you out of here on this one. Biggest surprise player for this upcoming season.
From
surprise, good or bad?
From the Bulls or league wide?
From the Bulls. Sorry, from the Bulls.
Okay. Gosh, my gut says Vucevic for all the reasons we talked about. However, I'm going to go with Coby.
Okay.
I actually expect a big year out of Coby this season. He finally has had an injury-free, normal offseason back-to-back to help develop. Like, so I'll back up a little bit. Coby's first year in the league, you get drafted. like those off seasons are going to be weird. They're going to be very odd anyway. He has his rookie season. Everything shuts down in March of 2020 because of COVID. So he gets no real offseason. I mean, you remember that offseason, Jamal. Like nobody worked out with anybody else. It was all individual workout. Like players were trying to like rent homes that had a basketball court so they could like practice inside and not have their game go rusty. So that first offseason was no good. Coby's second offseason, I believe he had a shoulder issue he was dealing with and
wasn't able to do training camp.
And couldn't do the normal offseason stuff there. And so finally, in his third full off season, he was able to work on his game. And that's where we saw the step up from him in his ball handling ability, right? He's got a coach he works with, Johnny Two Dribbles, or Dribbles Too Much, Johnny Dribbles Too Much, that has worked on his ball handling ability that he swears by, that we saw significant improvement from year 2 Coby to year 3 Coby in his playmaking, his ball handling ability, because he had a full offseason. He has once again had a full offseason to do workouts, and he is very, very hard worker. And so I think in terms of the under the radar player who we're probably going to get a potential leap from is Coby. And if it can be done in that second unit, like there's no reason that he can't average double digits off the bench for this team, given the unit he's going to be playing with. Because like even going back to the reserves I mentioned before about the probable bench unit, you even throw Io in the mix. There isn't really a scorer in that 6 through 10 rotation right now, unless it's Coby. And so I think he's going to have significant opportunity in those stretches to get up shots. And I think if we see a little bit of P. Will playing that second unit, which I think is very smart, because we need to see development from Patrick Williams this year, right? There's a lot of expectation. And we talked about his extension, but also on the court. We saw improvement from him last year, but I think minutes with Coby in that second unit staggered with the first unit, I think you're then going to see a two-man game develop between Coby and P. Will that I think is intriguing to me. So, yeah, my answer to that question is, aside from Vucevic and his new potential role in this offense, I'm going with Coby.
Love it. You know, for me, I think I'm kind of going with the cliche answer, but it's going to be Vucevic, just mainly because of all the things that were talked about at media day. I think he's going to change his overall game to where it's going to fit for this team, and I think the negative perception around him, which I don't think is fair, but the negative perception around him from Bulls fans is going to change. That's going to be my biggest surprise, but I can't wait for the season to start. Really looking forward to it. Hopefully, you know, we'll be able to follow along on all the great work that you guys are doing along the way. And obviously, Kevin, really appreciate you making the time, you know, for all of us fans. We appreciate all the great work that you guys do over at NBC Sports Chicago. Best of luck to the season. Hopefully we can connect again at some point down the road as well.
Yeah, and for everybody interested in what's happening in Nashville training camp, Casey Johnson is your guy. Obviously, you follow him on Twitter, KCJ Hoop, but certainly his work on NBCSportsChicago.com. He is down there with one of our photographers this week, so we'll have
excellent
interviews from training camp, hopefully an injury-free training camp. It seems like this Nashville, I don't want to use the word experiment, but this Nashville training camp with the team getting away from Chicago for the start of camp is meant to foster togetherness and chemistry. And KC will be there every step of the way. And then certainly as we get into the preseason, we have every preseason game on NBC Sports Chicago. And then opening night in October, and we cannot wait. Kendall, Will, and Jason are going to all be back this season, and we'll do the best we can to have some fun and inform and entertain.
Well, what we appreciate is your guys' you know, transparency and honesty for, you know, how the team is evaluated. That's always been appreciated by the fans. What you know, I'm calling this thing in Nashville, it's like a company offsite.
Yeah, it is.
That's right? The way I've kind of been viewing it. Like, you know, it's like someone who works, you know, for a large organization. It's like you have these company offsites to try to get away from it all and have these team building activities. That's what I'm going to start calling it now, as a company offsite for these guys. And going,
I think they're going to do any like cliche team building, like trust falls and things like that. You know, they doing stuff off the court. I don't know. We'll have to get Casey.
We'll have to ask KC to see what actually went down. But
yeah.
Anyway, Kevin, appreciate the time, man. You have a good one. All right.
Thank you, Jamal. Appreciate you inviting me and having me on.
Absolutely.